The narrow road twisted upward through the mountains like a scar carved into the rock. Dust rose behind the old truck as it climbed, its engine echoing against the tall pines. The man behind the wheel leaned forward, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Years had passed since he last drove this road, but every curve and bend still lived inside his memory. He knew the turns, the sharp drops, and the way the air grew colder as the road climbed higher. He also knew what waited at the end of it. A cabin, his cabin, hidden deep inside the valley where few dared to go. The valley had been his home long ago. Back then it was quiet, peaceful, and free. He could fish in the streams, hunt in the forests, and sit on his porch listening to the wind whistle through the mountains. But that was years before the Homeowners Association came. Years before rules and fines replaced freedom. And years before one woman rose to control it all, Karen. As his truck rolled past the old wooden sign that marked the edge of the valley, he felt eyes on him. A couple walking their dog stopped and stared. A man mowing his lawn cut the engine and watched. Curtains shifted in windows as faces peeked out. The man in the truck kept driving, his jaw tightening. He had expected this. In a place ruled by fear, a stranger, or someone they thought was a stranger, was trouble. The cabin appeared at last, sitting on the slope like it had always been there, stubborn and proud. The paint was faded, the roof sagged a little, but it was still strong. It was his. He parked, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment in silence. Memories flooded back. The smell of pine needles after rain, nights lit by fireflies, mornings filled with bird song. This was home. He stepped out of the truck. The cool mountain air filled his lungs, sharp and clean. He stretched his arms, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Relief because he was back. Unease because he knew trouble would follow soon. He could almost feel it rushing down the mountain toward him. It didn't take long. A voice cracked across the quiet like a whip. "What do you think you're doing here?" He turned. A woman marched up the dirt path, her arms crossed, her face red with anger. She wore a bright vest with the letters HOA stitched on it, as if she wanted everyone to know her power. Her steps were fast and hard, each one kicking up small clouds of dust. "Excuse me?" the man asked, his tone calm. "This cabin," she said, pointing a finger like it was a weapon. "It's not supposed to be occupied. You can't just waltz back in here without approval." "Who gave you permission?" The man studied her face. The years had not softened her. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth tight, and her voice carried the kind of authority that came from fear, not respect. This had to be her, Karen, the woman who ruled the valley like a queen. "I don't need permission," he said. Karen blinked, then laughed sharply. "Oh yes you do. Every inch of this valley is under HOA control. Rules, regulations, codes. You name it. We keep order here. And I don't recognize you. So I'll ask again. What are you doing here?" The neighbors had gathered now. Some stood on porches, some at the edge of their yards. They whispered but didn't come closer. They wanted to see the show but didn't dare interfere. "This is my cabin," the man said simply. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Your cabin? Don't be ridiculous. This property was abandoned years ago. We've been managing it for the community. You can't just claim it." "I'm not claiming it," he replied. His voice was steady, almost too steady. "I'm returning to it." Karen's face darkened. She stepped closer, so close he could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of dust and pine. "Listen here," she hissed. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but people like you don't last long here. We have rules, and I enforce them." The man didn't move. He didn't flinch. He only looked at her, his calmness like a stone wall against her storm. "You'll find I'm not easy to move," he said. Her lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see about that." The tension hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, torn between curiosity and fear. A dog barked in the distance, and somewhere up the hill a door slammed shut. The valley seemed to be holding its breath. Karen leaned back, crossing her arms again. "Fine," she said. "Enjoy your little visit. But don't get too comfortable. You'll be hearing from us very soon." She turned sharply and walked away, her voice rising as she shouted to the neighbors. "Don't worry, everyone. I'll take care of this intruder. The valley will remain safe." Safe. The word echoed bitterly in the man's mind. Safe from what? From freedom? From the truth? He stood alone in front of his cabin as the crowd began to drift away, whispering to each other. Their eyes stayed on him even as they left. Some looked afraid. Some looked curious. A few looked almost hopeful. The man opened the cabin door. The smell of old wood and dust washed over him, mixed with something deeper, something that reminded him of everything he had once loved about this place. He stepped inside, his boots creaking against the floorboards. The cabin was worn, but it was still strong, like the valley itself. Like him. He set his bag down and walked to the window. From there he could see the valley stretching wide below, forests rolling like waves, the stream glinting in the sunlight. It was beautiful. It was his. But now it was also a battlefield, and the war had already begun. He whispered to himself, "She has no idea what's coming." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the first hints of a storm. The next morning, the valley woke early. The sun rose over the mountain ridge, turning the sky into gold and fire. Birds sang, but the air still felt heavy, as if the land itself was waiting for something. The man sat on the cabin porch, a cup of coffee in his hands. The steam curled upward and vanished in the cool morning breeze. He watched the mist rolling down the valley like ghosts fading into the trees. He wasn't surprised when the sound of footsteps came up the dirt path. Sharp, quick steps. The kind of steps made by someone angry. Karen appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 men and a woman followed behind her, each holding clipboards, each wearing the same smug expression. They stopped a few feet from the porch, their eyes scanning the cabin as if it were already marked for demolition. "Well," Karen said, her voice loud enough for neighbors across the valley to hear, "it looks like our guest didn't take my advice to leave." The man took a slow sip of his coffee, then set the mug down on the wooden rail. He said nothing. Karen's eyes narrowed. She hated silence. She wanted submission, apologies, excuses, anything that proved her power. "Let's be clear," she said, unfolding a stack of papers from her clipboard. "You're in violation of multiple HOA codes. First, this cabin hasn't been inspected in years. That's a violation of safety. Second, the paint is peeling, which violates property appearance standards. Third, you don't have clearance for occupancy. That means you're trespassing." She snapped the papers straight, her mouth curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Altogether, you owe fines of $7,500. And if you don't pay within 30 days, this property will be seized." The man stood slowly. He was calm, but there was steel in his movements, like someone used to being tested. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked down at Karen. Their eyes locked. "This is my property," he said. "I don't owe you anything." Karen let out a short, sharp laugh. "That's what they all say at first. Everyone thinks they're special. But no one is above the rules. Not you. Not anyone." The 2 men behind her nodded. The woman scribbled something on her clipboard, glancing up at the cabin with disapproval, though her eyes flickered with unease. Neighbors had gathered again. Word had spread fast. They stood at the edges of their yards, pretending to be busy, watering plants, walking dogs, but their ears were sharp, and their eyes never left the confrontation. Karen raised her chin. "You have one option. Pay the fines or leave. If you resist, we'll bring in the county sheriff. And believe me, they listen to us. They always do." The man crossed his arms. His voice was steady, but it carried enough force to make the neighbors lean forward. "You have no power here. Not over me." Karen's face went red. She stepped closer, her finger stabbing the air toward him. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I built this community. I keep it safe. Without me, this valley would fall apart. I won't let some outsider tear it down." The man tilted his head slightly. "Outsider? I grew up here. I built half this cabin with my own hands before you ever showed up." Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected that. She recovered quickly, though her anger flaring again. Then you should know better. If you want to stay, you follow the rules. My rules. He stepped off the porch. The crowd gasped softly as his boots hit the dirt. He walked right up to her, close enough that the wind pushed a strand of her hair across her face. He didn't raise his voice, but his words cut sharper than a knife. I don't bow to bullies. Karen froze. The men behind her shuffled uncomfortably. The woman with the clipboard bit her lip, as if holding back words she dared not say. Karen recovered, but only with rage. This isn't over, she hissed. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. She turned sharply to her group. Let's go. We'll file immediate action. He won't last the week. They stormed off down the path, their clipboards clutched like weapons, their muttering filling the air. The man stood there watching them leave. The crowd across the valley began to scatter, whispering urgently. Some shook their heads. Others looked at him with curiosity, even admiration. A few seemed scared, not of him, but of what would come next. He went back to the porch, picked up his coffee, and sat again. The birds sang. The stream whispered below. But the storm was coming. Hours later, a knock hit his door. Not sharp, not angry, hesitant. He opened it to find a neighbor, an older man with tired eyes. The neighbor glanced around nervously before speaking. You should be careful, he said in a low voice. Karen, she doesn't lose. She's run people out of this valley before. Families, good people. They packed up in the night, couldn't take it anymore. The man studied him. And you? The neighbor looked down at his boots. I stayed. Didn't want trouble. None of us do. But maybe... His voice trailed off, then returned as a whisper. Maybe it's time someone stood up to her. The man gave a small nod. Then watch closely. The neighbor swallowed hard, then hurried away, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a heavy weight. The man closed the door. He looked around his cabin, then out the window toward the valley. The forest stretched wide, the mountains stood tall. It was beautiful, but under the surface it was broken. Fear ran through it like a poisoned river. He whispered to himself, she thinks she has power. She has no idea. And in that moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath again, waiting for the next move in a battle that had only just begun. The third day in the valley broke with silence. Not the peaceful silence of nature, but a heavy one, thick with waiting. The man sat inside his cabin, repairing an old lantern. The soft scrape of metal against metal was the only sound. He expected a storm to come, not one of rain but of people. And he was right. By mid-morning, voices carried up the dirt path. Loud, sharp voices, filled with purpose. The man set the lantern aside and stepped onto the porch. Karen was back. This time she didn't come alone with a few followers. She brought nearly a dozen HOA members, all with clipboards, papers, and cameras hanging from their necks. They moved like a unit, each step tight and fast, like soldiers marching into battle. At the front, Karen's face glowed with smug satisfaction. She stopped at the edge of the cabin yard and planted her feet firmly, as if she were standing on her own land. Well, she said loudly, her voice carrying across the valley, we gave you a chance. We offered you a way out, but you ignored us. So now we do things the hard way. The man leaned on the porch rail, his eyes steady. This is my land. You don't scare me. Karen smiled, but it wasn't kind. Oh, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to bury you in violations. At her signal, the HOA members spread out like vultures. They took photos of peeling paint, scribbled notes about overgrown grass, pointed at the old shed behind the cabin, even crouched down to measure cracks in the driveway. Every tiny flaw was written down as if it were a crime. One of them, a younger man with nervous hands, muttered as he wrote, rotting wood on the porch, code 752. Chimney not cleared, violation 309. Non-standard mailbox, violation 561. His words rolled like a chant of doom. The man crossed his arms, watching them. He said nothing. His silence seemed to make Karen even bolder. You see, she said, waving at her crew, we run this valley. We set the standards. And if you don't meet them, you don't stay. You think you can resist? You'll drown in fines before you can blink. Neighbors had gathered again. This time there were more of them, standing in small groups along the road, whispering nervously. Children peeked from behind parents. Some of the older residents shook their heads sadly, as if they'd seen this play out before. Karen turned to the crowd, raising her voice like a performer on a stage. This is what happens when people think they're above the rules. We keep this valley safe, clean, and beautiful. But we can't allow troublemakers to threaten that. Don't worry. Your HOA has everything under control. Some neighbors nodded quickly, afraid not to. Others avoided her eyes, their faces pale. A few looked at the man, their eyes holding something different, something like hope. Karen turned back to him. You have 72 hours to vacate. If you're still here after that, we'll have you removed. And trust me, the sheriff listens to me. The man finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying. This valley doesn't belong to you. No matter how many papers you wave in the air, no matter how loud you shout, it doesn't change that fact. Karen's smirk faltered, just for a moment. Then it returned, sharper than before. We'll see about that. You're just another fool who thinks he's untouchable. But everyone breaks eventually. Everyone. The HOA members finished their sweep, handing Karen stacks of papers filled with violations. She flipped through them quickly, then snapped them shut with satisfaction. 32 violations, she announced. That's a record. Congratulations. You owe more than most families pay in a year. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. That calmness unsettled her more than any shouting could have. Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Leave while you still can. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you regret ever coming back here. Her words hung in the air like poison. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned sharply, signaling her group to leave. They marched down the path, their clipboards clutched tight, their chatter sharp and confident. The neighbors began to scatter too, but slower, their whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Some glanced back at the man, as if waiting to see what he would do next. He stood on the porch long after they were gone, staring at the valley below. The mountains stood tall and silent. The forest swayed gently in the wind. Nature didn't care about papers or clipboards. It didn't bow to anyone, and neither would he. That evening, as the sun sank behind the peaks, another knock came at his door. This time it wasn't hesitant. It was firm, quick, urgent. He opened it to find the same neighbor from before, the older man with tired eyes. Behind him stood a woman clutching a child's hand. Both looked nervous, their eyes darting toward the road. They won't stop, the neighbor said. You saw it today. Once they set their sights on you, they don't let go. They'll bleed you dry or worse. They've done it before. The woman spoke, her voice trembling. We lost our farm because of her. My husband fought, but the fines never stopped. We had no choice but to sell. She'll never stop until you're gone. The man listened silently, his jaw tight. The neighbor leaned closer, his voice dropping. But maybe you're different. You didn't back down today. People noticed. People are talking. Some of us are tired of being afraid. If you stand, maybe we'll stand too. The man looked out into the valley, the night creeping across it like a dark tide. The lights of houses flickered one by one, small sparks against the shadows. He finally spoke, his voice steady. I didn't come back to run. Let her bring her threats. Let her bring her fines. She has no idea what she's up against. The woman's eyes widened. The neighbor's shoulders eased just slightly. They exchanged a look, half fear, half hope. Then they nodded and left quickly, disappearing into the night. The man closed the door and sat by the window, staring into the darkness. He could almost feel Karen's eyes out there, watching, waiting, plotting her next move. The battle lines had been drawn, and the war for the valley was only beginning. Night settled heavy over the mountains. The valley lay in darkness, broken only by the thin silver of moonlight cutting across the trees. The man sat at the old wooden table inside his cabin, a lantern flickering beside him. Spread across the table were papers. Yellowed, brittle with age, but still sharp with truth. Deeds, maps, contracts, documents that told a story no one in the valley seemed to know. He traced one page with his finger. His father's name was signed at the bottom, bold and strong. Below it was his own signature, written years ago when he was barely a man. He remembered that day, the lawyer's office, the ink drying on the page, the feeling of weight in his chest as he realized what he now carried. It wasn't just the cabin. It wasn't just the slope where the pines leaned into the sky. It was the entire valley. All of it. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the wind outside. Karen thought she owned the valley with her rules and fines. The neighbors believed they lived under her authority. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that every fence, every stream, every cabin, even the land Karen's house sat on, belonged to him. A memory rose unbidden. His father's voice, deep and steady. This land is more than dirt and trees. It's freedom. Someday you'll need to protect it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who calls it home. The man clenched his fist. The time his father spoke of had come. A knock rattled the door. Not sharp, not angry, timid. He rose and opened it to find the older neighbor again, his eyes nervous, his hat pulled low. He stepped inside quickly, glancing behind him as if afraid of shadows. "They're planning something," the neighbor said in a low voice. "Karen called a meeting tonight at the community hall. She's telling everyone you're dangerous, that you're going to ruin the valley if you stay. She's trying to turn them all against you." The man's jaw tightened. "And will they listen?" The neighbor hesitated. "Most will. Fear makes people blind. But not all of us. Some of us remember the valley before her." His eyes flickered toward the papers on the table. "What are those?" The man looked down at the deeds. For a moment he considered hiding them again. The fewer people who knew, the safer it was. But then he thought of Karen's threats, her lies, the way she had crushed families into silence. He turned the papers toward the neighbor. "This valley is mine." The neighbor blinked. "Yours? What do you mean?" "I mean my father bought it. Every acre. It was passed to me years ago. The cabin, the hills, the streams, all of it. Even Karen's house sits on my land." The neighbor's mouth fell open. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the edge of the deed. His eyes scanned the paper, his breath catching as he read the words. This changes everything," he whispered. The man shook his head. "Not yet. If I reveal this too soon, Karen will twist it. She'll call it fake, drag me into court, delay until people give up. I need the right moment. When the valley is watching, when her mask is slipping, that's when I'll strike." The neighbor nodded slowly, awe flickering in his tired eyes. "All these years we thought she held the power. And all this time," he let the thought trail off. Then he stood, his shoulders straighter than before. "If you need me, I'll be there. I'm done living in fear." When he left, the man sat alone again. He folded the papers carefully and placed them inside a weathered wooden box. Then he slid the box beneath the floorboards, where it had always been kept safe. The next day dawned bright but tense. The valley seemed restless. Karen's voice carried across yards as she barked orders to her loyal followers. HOA members went door to door, handing out notices, warning residents not to side with the stranger. "He's dangerous," they whispered. "He'll bring ruin." The man watched from his porch. He saw the way neighbors glanced at him when they thought no one was looking. Some looked afraid. Some looked curious. A few looked quietly hopeful. By noon, Karen herself marched up the path again. She didn't bother with a smile this time. Her eyes burned with fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. Two of her most loyal men followed, carrying cameras. "You ignored my warnings," she snapped. "So let's make this official." She held up a thick envelope and slapped it against her palm. "This is a notice of legal action. You've been fined 32 violations. Total owed, $23,400. Pay now or we'll seize the property." The man's calm never wavered. This cabin isn't yours to seize. Karen's voice rose, sharp enough for neighbors across the valley to hear. Everything here belongs to the HOA. We decide who stays and who goes. And you, she jabbed a finger at him, will be gone before the week is out. The man stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. He didn't shout. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the neighbors lean forward. You don't own this valley, Karen. No matter what lies you tell, no matter how many papers you wave, the truth will come out. And when it does, you'll have nothing left. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. It was small, gone in an instant, but it was there. She turned sharply, motioning her men to follow. This isn't over, she spat. You'll regret crossing me. As she stormed away, whispers rippled through the watching neighbors. They had heard his words. They had seen her flinch. Something had shifted, even if they didn't understand it yet. That night, the valley was alive with rumors. In kitchens and on porches, people whispered about the stranger who claimed the cabin. Some said he was reckless. Others said he was brave. A few said he might be the one who could finally break Karen's grip. And alone in his cabin, the man sat by the lantern's glow, his father's words echoing in his mind. Someday you'll need to protect it. That someday had arrived. The Valley Meeting Hall was a small wooden building near the stream, built years ago for town gatherings. Tonight its windows glowed with yellow light, spilling across the dirt road. Voices carried into the night, sharp and restless. The man stood outside in the cool air, listening. He knew Karen had called this meeting to crush him once and for all. She wanted the valley gathered so she could turn them against him. But he was ready. The time to stay silent had passed. Inside, the hall buzzed with neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder. Families filled the benches, children sat on laps, and older folks leaned on canes. At the front stood Karen, her bright vest shining like a crown, her voice loud and commanding. He's a danger to all of us, she declared, pointing toward the door as if the man were already standing there. He refuses to follow rules. He refuses to pay fines. He thinks he's above the law. If we don't act now, he'll drag this whole valley down with him. Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Some nodded quickly. Others frowned, uneasy. A few stayed quiet, their eyes lowered. Karen lifted a thick folder and slapped it on the table. 32 violations. Over 20,000 in fines. That's what this so-called neighbor owes. And if he refuses to pay, the sheriff will remove him. Simple as that. The crowd shifted. People whispered nervously. Some clapped weakly. Karen smiled, feeding on their fear. That was when the door opened. The man stepped inside. The hall went silent. All eyes turned. He didn't rush. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. He stopped a few feet from Karen, his gaze steady. "You've said enough," he said quietly. Karen's smile tightened. "How dare you interrupt this meeting? You're not even supposed to be here." "This is my valley," he replied. Laughter broke out in the back of the hall, sharp and mocking. Karen spread her arms. "You see? He's delusional. He thinks he owns the valley. But we know the truth, don't we? The HOA keeps this place safe. Without us, there would be chaos." The man reached into his coat. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen stepped back, fear flashing across her face before she covered it with anger. From his coat, the man pulled a weathered folder. He laid it on the table beside her stack of fines. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the papers inside. "These are deeds," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Signed by my father. Recorded in the county office. Passed to me years ago. Not just for this cabin. Not just for a piece of land. For the entire valley." He held up the largest document. A map of the valley, its borders marked in bold ink. At the bottom, 2 signatures, his father's and his own. A murmur rose from the crowd, low at first, then swelling like a wave. People leaned forward, straining to see. Faces that had been afraid now showed something else, hope. Karen's face turned pale. She grabbed the document, scanning it quickly. Her lips pressed tight. This means nothing. Old papers. Outdated. Fake. The man shook his head. These records are real. They've been filed with the county for decades. Every cabin here sits on land that belongs to me. Even your house, Karen. Gasps filled the hall. Neighbors turned to one another, eyes wide. The sound of whispers swirled like a storm. Karen slammed her hand on the table. Lies. Don't listen to him. He's trying to trick you. The HOA owns this land. We make the rules. The man's voice cut through her, shouting like a blade. No. You've tricked them. You've stolen from them. You've used fear to build your power. But it ends tonight. He spread the documents across the table for all to see. Deeds, contracts, maps, proof layered over proof. The crowd surged forward, eyes scanning, hands trembling as they touched the papers. A woman in the front row spoke first, her voice shaking. All those fines. All the money you took from us. An older man stood, his cane clattering against the floor. You made us believe we had no choice. You lied to us. The whispers turned into voices, the voices into shouts. The hall roared with anger. Not at the man, but at Karen. She stepped back, her face red, her hands trembling. You don't understand. Without me, this valley would fall apart. You need me. No, the man said firmly. They never needed you. You needed them to feed your control, your greed. But now they see the truth. Karen's mask cracked. Her eyes darted around the hall, searching for loyalty, for someone to defend her. But the neighbors she once controlled now glared at her with fury. Even her loyal board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. The man picked up the deeds and held them high. This valley is free. No more HOA. No more fear. From this day on, you answer to me, and I answer to no one but the land itself. The hall erupted. Cheers mixed with shouts, voices rising like thunder. People clapped, shouted his name, cried with relief. The valley had been broken for so long, but in that moment, it felt whole again. Karen stumbled back, her voice drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Her power was slipping through her fingers like sand. She tried one last time, her voice shrill. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this. But no one listened. The man stood tall, the papers in his hand glowing in the lantern light. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, knowing the battle was not yet finished. Because Karen was not the type to walk away quietly. And deep in her eyes, beneath the rage and the fear, burned a single promise. Revenge. The night air outside the meeting hall was thick with voices. Neighbors poured into the dirt road, their lanterns swinging, their faces alive with excitement and disbelief. For years, they had lived under Karen's shadow, paying fines they could not afford, obeying rules that made no sense, and fearing the knock of her enforcers. Now, with one stack of deeds laid on the table, the chains had fallen away. The man stood at the steps of the hall, the valley map still in his hand. He looked out over the crowd, listening as their voices grew into chants. His name carried by the people who, just hours ago, had doubted him. Relief filled their voices, but also anger. They had been fooled too long, and their fury now turned on the woman who had ruled them. Karen stood apart, her face pale in the lantern light. Her hands clutched the edges of her vest, her eyes flicking left and right as if searching for an escape. She had lost her grip in one night, her empire shattered. But even as the crowd turned against her, the man saw something dangerous in her eyes. It was not surrender. It was something colder, something waiting. A woman from the crowd stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. What happens now? Do we keep paying? Do we still follow rules? The man shook his head. No more HOA. No more fines. This valley belongs to its people. To you. To me. To all who live here. From this day forward, no one will control you with fear. Cheers burst across the crowd. Some people hugged each other. Some wept. It was as if chains they had carried for years had been broken in a single night. But Karen's voice suddenly cut through the noise. Sharp. Bitter. You think this is over? You think you've won? "You're a fool." The crowd turned. Some jeered. Others shouted back. But Karen didn't flinch. She stepped onto the steps beside the man, her face twisted in anger. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed. "You think the county will honor those deeds? You think the state will bow to you? Paper means nothing without power. And I still have power." The man looked at her, steady and calm. "Your power was built on lies. Tonight, the lies end." But Karen only smiled. A cold, sharp smile that made the crowd uneasy. "You've declared war on me. And I don't lose wars." She turned sharply, pushing through the crowd. People shouted at her. Some threw words like stones. But she didn't stop. She disappeared into the shadows, her vest vanishing down the road. The celebration outside dimmed. A silence fell over the neighbors. The man knew they were free, yes, but freedom was never without a cost. Karen would not stop. She would come back, and when she did, she would strike hard. He raised his voice, steady and strong. "Tonight you saw the truth. Karen's rule is finished. But she won't go quietly. She'll try to take this valley back. When she does, we stand together. No more fear. No more silence. This is our land, and we will defend it." The people answered with a roar, a promise in their voices. For the first time in years, they were united not by fear, but by hope. The man folded the deeds carefully and slipped them into his coat. The night had given him victory, but also a warning. Karen's threat was not empty. She had connections, influence, and a mind twisted enough to use them all. The valley was free. But for how long? The next morning dawned with golden light spilling across the ridges. Birds sang in the pines. The stream glittered like silver as it wound past the cabins. For once, the valley felt alive again. Neighbors gathered outside their homes, smiling, talking freely. Children played in the dirt roads without parents calling them back in fear of HOA fines. A man began fixing his fence without worrying about being charged for the wrong type of wood. A woman hung laundry on a line, her face lifted to the sun. Simple things, things they had not dared to enjoy for years. The man walked through the valley, nodding as people greeted him. Some thanked him with tears in their eyes. Some shook his hand firmly. He accepted it all with quiet humility. He had not set out to be a leader, but the valley had given him no choice. At his cabin, he laid the deeds on the table. His father's name stared back at him in bold ink, a reminder of the promise made long ago, that the valley must always be protected. He traced the lines of the map with his finger, knowing Karen would return to challenge him. The sound of wheels on gravel broke the morning calm. He stepped onto his porch and saw a black SUV creeping down the road. Its windows were tinted, its engine low and heavy. It did not belong to any neighbor. It stopped near the old meeting hall, and two men in suits stepped out. They carried briefcases. Their faces were sharp, their eyes colder than the mountain air. The neighbors noticed too. One by one, heads turned. Conversations stopped. The valley grew silent again, the joy of freedom replaced with unease. The man narrowed his eyes. He knew this was Karen's move. She had lost the valley, but she had called for bigger guns. The two men walked to the center of the road. One of them opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. His voice carried through the still morning air. "We represent the county. There are questions about ownership in this valley. Questions about legality. We are here to review deeds and determine rightful control." The neighbors murmured in fear. Had it all been a trick? Could the county take the land from them again? The man stepped forward, calm but firm. "The deeds are real. They've stood for decades. You can review them, but the valley knows the truth now. And we will not be controlled again." The man in the suit smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "We'll see." The SUV door opened again, and out stepped Karen. Her vest was gone. She wore black, her hair tied back, her face hard and sharp. She walked with the men as if she commanded them, her eyes locked on the man standing in front of his cabin. The crowd gasped. Fear rippled again. She had returned, and she was not alone. The valley had tasted freedom for one night, but the real fight was only beginning.